How? So as our fantastic MC said, my name is Nick Fortino. I work in the US as a psychology professor and a yoga teacher, and I work as a counselor for people in jail. And I am very optimistic about our future, despite all the reasons to be pessimistic. And events like this amplify my optimism, so I, like every other speaker has done, want to thank everybody who organized this, and I want to thank everybody who showed up to participate in this. As you saw or see, the title of my presentation is Transformation, the Psychology and Neuroscience of Yoga. And I think it will be appropriate to begin by clarifying what each of those words mean. So, what is psychology? I think many of you are familiar with this, but still, let's clarify. Psychology, if you open up a psychology textbook, the definition you'll see is the science of behavior and mental processes. And that is accurate. And another way you can think of it is psychology is the investigation of the question, why do we do what we do? And why do we feel what we feel? And why do we think what we think? What are the sources of human behavior and human emotion? And psychology seeks to identify the strategies that can improve our quality of life. What is neuroscience? Neuroscience basically is the study of the nervous system. So as you may know, these beautiful bodies are comprised of these 11 major systems. There's the skeletal system, the muscular system, the endocrine system, the digestive system, the urinary system, the reproductive system, the immune system, the system of your skin, cardiovascular system, the circulatory system, the respiratory system, and then the nervous system. And the nervous system includes your brain and your spinal cord and all of the nerves that sprout from the spinal cord. So neuroscience is particularly the study of the nervous system and how it interacts with the other 10 systems. Okay. What is yoga? Yoga is a way of life dedicated to freedom from unnecessary suffering. And the particular aspects of yoga that are relevant for our discussion today are what people call asana, or the yoga postures and movements, the science of breathing, and meditation. And we'll touch on each of those as we talk today. What is transformation? By transformation, I mean a significant and lasting change in a person's way of being. And by way of being, I mean the way a person perceives the world, the things they tend to think about, the patterns of their emotions, and the habits of their behaviors. And we see transformation all throughout nature, right? Most beautifully exemplified when a little caterpillar is hatched from an egg and perhaps does not even know what its fate is. It just knows that it's hungry. So it eats, and it eats, and it eats, and it nourishes itself, not necessarily knowing what this nourishment will eventually be dedicated to. And then one day it recedes inward, and it goes into itself, and it deconstructs itself down into nothing, and then it reconstructs itself, and then it emerges as this, to the caterpillar, probably unimaginably beautiful, capable creature. And I think that we see similar transformations in people Now that I've defined the terms in the title of my presentation, I want to express the main point, because you won't remember every word I say today. So I want to make sure that you have a takeaway, something you can remember. And the main point of my presentation is simple. It's that yoga facilitates transformation. It's very good at that. And the two specific ways that yoga can facilitate transformation are, number one, it cultivates positive states of mind. And number two, it helps people to process unpleasant emotions in a healthy way. Now I'm going to explain exactly how yoga does this. Now, because for many of this is being translated, I want to just make sure that what I'm saying is understandable. So after I say what I'm about to say, I'll ask you if you understood that, and I'll ask you to raise your hand if you did. So in a moment, I'm about to ask and check that what I'm about to say was indeed understandable. So we're going to start to focus on the psychology of this process. And I mentioned the words state of mind. Yoga cultivates positive states of mind. So what do I mean by that? Well, a state, I'm sure you have a sense of what we mean. A state is a basic quality. And what's very interesting to examine about a state of mind is when we are in a state of mind, or you can think of the word mood, that quality is reflected in all the different aspects of our experience. So for example, if you are feeling anxious, usually you'll have the feeling, the emotion of anxiety. Your body will reflect that anxiety by holding tension. Your thinking will reflect that anxiety by being fearful and worrisome and doubtful. And even your breathing will reflect that anxiety by being shallow and erratic. So when we think of a state of mind, we can see that we're talking about the whole quality that has kind of taken over the person, okay? Now in psychology, when we study like personalities, we distinguish between states and traits. A state, as I just mentioned, is this basic quality of being, but the thing about a state of mind is it's not necessarily a characteristic of the person. It's usually much more temporary and much more based on the current conditions, on the situation a person is in. Whereas a trait, that is a characteristic of a person. That is something that is consistent across time and across different situations for a person. And we would say, so for example, there are, let's say, the state of mind of feeling grumpy. Let's take that example. I think every single one of us in here knows what it's like to feel grumpy, to be in that state of mind. But that doesn't mean that that's a personality trait of yours. However, there are some people in the world who we might describe as grumpy people, or who might self-identify as kind of grumpy, meaning that they're grumpy on a consistent basis even after they've had their coffee and enough sleep. So traits are relatively independent of the conditions of the moment. Take as another example, peaceful. We all know what it feels like to feel at peace. But for some people, the experience of being peaceful depends on many things going just right. Like they need to be sitting on a beautiful park bench, looking over a still lake at sunset to experience peace. Whereas some people, they're peaceful everywhere they go. And in those cases, we would say that this person has the personality trait of being peaceful. and that this trait of being peaceful is quite independent of situations that that person finds him or herself in. Okay, now's the time I want to check your understanding. So, will you raise your hand if that made sense? If you feel like you understand what the difference between a state and a trait is? Okay. I think we at least have the vast majority, which gives me permission to move forward, because once you understand that, you are ready to understand this next main point, which is our states can become our traits. Our states can become our traits. When we experience a particular state of mind consistently, it can become a characteristic. So when we have these practices, and it can be yoga, yoga is extremely effective, but there are many more, of course, Tai Chi, martial arts, dancing, many what we could call spiritual practices. They are practices in cultivating very optimal states of mind, and by cultivating them consistently, especially over a long term, they become traits. And specifically, just one important little thing to clarify is we're talking about when we cultivate states without consuming anything. When we can generate a positive state from within. Those are the type of states that can then become personality traits. So it's beautiful to know that, for example, if you feel like you experience anxiety often and you would love to just be a relaxed person, you can be. And the key is to find some type of practice that helps to cultivate the feeling of relaxation. And by being dedicated to that practice and disciplined and bringing about that mental state consistently, it then becomes a trait. And this is evident on the level of the brain. So now we bring in some of the neuroscience. There's a term that you may have heard, which is brain plasticity, also known as neuroplasticity. Or you can just think of it as the fact that the brain can change. It was once believed that significant changes in the brain were limited to early development. But now we know that that's not true, that in fact the brain is extremely sensitive to new demands and will sculpt itself and form connections that it never had if you ask it to. So, one example is let's say if you don't know how to juggle and you learn how to juggle, your brain will change in the areas associated with hand-eye coordination. Studies like this have been done. If you learn a new instrument, there will be measurable differences in your brain from before and after learning that instrument. If you learn a new language, the language production centers of the brain and the language comprehension centers of the brain, they increase in density, meaning they form more connections. And there's another word, which is self-directed neuroplasticity. In other words, you can intentionally promote changes in your brain. One example of this, in one experiment that was done in the United States, a researcher got a group of people, and none of them knew how to play the piano. And he taught them all a very simple piano exercise. And he had half of them go practice that piano exercise on the piano for a few weeks. And he had the other half of them sit at a piano, but not touch it, and imagine that they were playing the piano. And at the end of this study, when they scanned everyone's brains again, the researchers found that the people who were only imagining themselves playing the piano without actually touching it, their brains changed in exactly the same way as the people who were actually playing the piano, which tells us that the mind is very powerful. And now this, of course, can be misinterpreted. I can imagine someone hearing about that study and then not showing up to their piano lessons for a couple weeks and then telling their piano teacher, yeah, well, no, I know I haven't been there, but I imagined I was there. Probably not going to go over very well. So, but the key point is these people did something with their mind that facilitated a change on the level of their brain. And self-directed neuroplasticity is defined as using your mind to change your brain to improve your mind. I would give you this metaphor. Some people compare our brains to a computer. And in some ways, that's an accurate analogy. Because indeed, it's kind of like we have a hardware, the physical brain, and then we have a software, the thoughts and images that flow through your consciousness. But the big difference is, with a computer, you can't download a software that would change the hardware. There's no software you could download onto your laptop that would actually change and reconfigure the metal parts of the computer. But with our minds and our brains, that is possible. The software can change the hardware in a way that makes it easier to run that new software. So for the person whose brain is not yet set up to be, for example, a peaceful person, if that person finds a way, a practice like yoga or breathing or something like that, that cultivates peace, well, the hardware, the brain, will change so that it is able to run this new software of peacefulness. In one study that demonstrates what I'm talking about, that is now directly related to yoga, researchers just took 33 people who had never meditated before, they split them into two groups, and they had 16 people learn this meditation technique. These people were on average aged 40. Again, they had never meditated, and they practiced for about 27 minutes a day a simple meditation technique of breath awareness, where they would simply sit here and they would close their eyes and they would breathe and intend on directing their attention to their breathing for that whole period of meditation. And the other group, they just went about business as usual. They were the comparison group. And at the end of this study, as you might predict I'm going to say, there were changes on the level of the people's brains who were meditating. There were changes in the areas of their brain that were associated with learning, memory, empathy, and emotion regulation. So these are very powerful practices, and the important thing to understand is that the brain always wants to do whatever you're asking it to do more efficiently, but it wants to be able to perform its functions with less energy. It wants to be able to do things effortlessly. And when a state can be accessed, right, when you can feel at peace and it's effortless to bring about this state of peace, that's when we know the brain has undergone the changes necessary, and we can say this is now a durable trait in the person. And exactly how yoga, for example, is cultivating these positive states with breathing, several teachers have guided you through simple breathing exercises, and there are many details to exactly what that is, what conscious breathing is doing to the nervous system. To be timely, I'll just summarize by saying, basically, conscious, slow breathing activates the relaxation response, which is known as the parasympathetic division of the nervous system. And it works every time. It's like a law of nature. So it's extremely effective in bringing about relaxation. And then when it comes to meditation, there are many types of meditation, that's worth saying, but all of them include relating to mental activity from a centered place in a healthy way. So more on that in just a moment. We see now how our states can become our traits, and there are very effective practices like yoga that cultivate positive states, and when we practice things like that consistently, those states can become traits, and that explains the first part of my point, that yoga facilitates transformation by cultivating positive states of mind. But then I said a second thing, which was that yoga can help people process unpleasant emotions in a healthy way. And I want to explain that now. So I loved what multiple speakers have said now, including Werner earlier and Yu Gong Zai yesterday, the man who spoke before lunch. They both spoke to the value of allowing yourself to experience emotions that we might call negative or unpleasant or painful. And indeed, I love something, I think it was Song Ling said, that wellness is deeper than happiness. And a person can be in a state of well-being amidst difficult emotions. So, to the question, how can we process unpleasant emotions in a healthy way? I would offer two main ideas. One, don't do it alone. People are not meant to process suffering alone, and there is profound healing that can come about when you express your pain to a trusted, empathic listener. One US musician put it well when he sang, "We all need somebody to lean on." We do. We really do. Lean on somebody, and you don't have to experience pain alone. That's one important piece. And then for the second part of how do we process unpleasant emotions in a healthy way, I would like to offer you a poem that I think nails it. And this poem is by a poet that many people know well, who goes by Rumi, who lived long ago in Persia. And the poem is called The Guest House. And it goes like this. This being human is a guest house. Every morning there's a new arrival, a joy, a meanness, a depression. Some momentary feeling comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. They may be clearing you for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. And be grateful for whatever comes, for each has been sent as a guide from beyond. That's the poem. And I'm sure you could reflect on that personally and glean your own wisdom from that. Two things that really stand out to me are, number one, the idea that emotions are guiding. even the unpleasant ones. And another idea is that you can meet those difficult emotions at the door laughing. This idea that you can be rooted in your wellness while processing an unpleasant emotion. And this is how we can ensure that these unpleasant emotions don't become traits, that they don't persist and revisit us every day. And this is where I think meditation is extremely valuable. So when you can think of meditation as a homecoming, as a way of connecting to who you are. And by being rooted in who you are, which we could say, I think we could all agree, that who each of us is a conscious being experiencing life. And when we close our eyes and we meditate, we witness our minds and we root ourselves in ourselves. And by doing so, we're not quite as overwhelmed by difficult emotions. We're not quite as confused by difficult emotions. We're not quite as dominated by them. When we learn to process emotions in a healthy way like this, we don't do regrettable things while feeling strong emotions. And so yoga is nothing short of self-realization. And by doing this, we can process difficult emotions in the healthiest way. I think the evolution of humanity happens in 7 billion individuals, or however many of us there are now. And I hope that what I've shared today has helped you do your part. 谢谢。
谢谢。